Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, 40 Accounting, which is, of course, one of our sister firms. It's one stop for all your accounting essentials. If you want to get your books in order, tax filing done, or you need some financial analysis, please reach out to 40accounting.com. We're really excited to have with us Jim Bodio and Stephen Ripsch. These are the founders of BRI Associates, and also they have a fantastic software called Growth Forge, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, which I've found interest in our discussions that as we've had prior to this conversation in person. They're also, their expertise or their experience comes from Intel. I think most people know who Intel is, and they have some really amazing experience in the strategy and innovation side there that we'll be able to talk about and how they've been able to apply this, not just to being there at Intel, but also being able to expand and provide this value to other companies throughout the US and world. So from that perspective, Jim and Stephen, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I always like to start out with this. When you had the aha moment that you knew what you had built with Growth Forge was a game changer for you?
Well, I'll jump in with one. So we were we left Intel about 7 years ago, and we were doing the consulting thing and generating an awful lot of spreadsheets for our clients. And that's really when we started building Growth Forge. Is there a better way to do this? More as a self-preservation thing than anything else. And we got really good at it. And then we started sharing that software with our clients, and we could show them on the fly where we're looking at this Growth Forge interface that we could change the business model, for instance, from selling a product to selling a product as a service, just like that. Something that would have taken us, at least a couple of weeks to experiment with on the spreadsheets. And so that's really when I think I knew we had something special.
Yeah, I think the other component of that was we had one of our initial clients was actually using the software, the early adopter in one group, and then end up leaving that part of the organization and went somewhere else. And then was also doing, new product revenue forecasting and opportunity analysis, and basically had to convince his management that they needed to adopt Growth Forge as well because he couldn't do it in Excel anymore. It just was going backwards for him. So that was a good positive indicator for us.
That is always a telltale sign, right? When you actually have a legitimate product, when people are saying, I need that, right? It's more value compared to what we've been using in the past. So once again, Jim or Stephen, whoever wants to lead in this, tell us a little bit more about Growth Forge. What is the product? Why did you create it? Give us some background behind that.
Yeah. So our experience at Intel was basically spent over a decade working in Intel's new business incubator, right? Where we're trying to drive growth through new products and new business models for Intel. And over that time, we learned a lot of lessons about, best practices and tools and thought frameworks and all these things and how to apply them. And when we left and founded BRI Associates, right, we were doing that as a consulting firm for other companies. One of the things we found, though, was that those thought frameworks are really challenging for people to apply on a blank page, right? So they make a lot of sense when you're looking at a case study where all of those thought frameworks are pre-populated and the answer is there. But when you're faced with a new concept, right, with all the uncertainty associated with it, it's really difficult, right, to kind of come up with those. And so we were doing a lot of best practices training, and we found ourselves sort of answering the same questions and kind of guiding people through the same process over and over. The content's always different, right? But the challenges in the issues are similar. So we kind of also realized that, hey, maybe we can make this more efficient, with software where, we can take some of this coaching and guidance and do it more interactively. And that's really when we started sort of experimenting and following our own methodologies around how do we do innovation, doing the software. But basically, what the software does is it walks you through the definition of your strategy hypothesis for a new product or a new business, and then helps you evaluate that strategy from multiple different perspectives, whether it's competitive or market opportunity, right, or your execution risk, and then gives you kind of an iterative process to go validate and de-risk the critical assumptions in your hypothesis. So it kind of follows the best practice of scaling your investment as you reduce the uncertainty and risk in your strategy.
So give me some examples of what does it mean for those who might not be familiar. What does it mean to de-risk your product evaluation?
Yeah, great question. So when you're defining a new hypothesis or a new strategy, right, there's so many questions you don't have the answers to, right? You don't know how big the market really is. You don't know how many of the customers, are really going to fit into your serviceable market. or who the competitors are and how your product differentiates, whether your solution actually delivers value, whether that product fits within the priorities and processes that are important to your company, right? All of those things are questions to be answered. And if you haven't done this process over and over many times, tens or hundreds of times like we have, those questions come quickly, right? And so the software helps you basically work through all those questions very quickly and efficiently work through that process.
Yeah, I think what we found is that teams tend to gravitate to their comfort zone. So if you have a bunch of engineers that are working on a strategy, they're going to go want to build a prototype. Or marketing, it may be go do a study. And really, you got to look at it holistically and say, what is the biggest unknown? And really focus in your efforts on that. What's the experiment I can do? The cheapest way I can find out a little bit better information on any particular aspect of this product or this strategy, and do that iteratively. We're really trying to help guide the folks to say, okay, based on the inputs that we've discovered and put in together, here's where your biggest uncertainties are, and really where you should focus.
Yeah, and one of the examples of that, right, is that a lot of times people will focus on these really detailed questions of can I deliver the competitive performance of my solution or whatever, but they don't stop to ask the question, if I succeed at this, is the market even big enough to matter? And so this was one that we ran into at Intel a lot, right? Because if it's not going to be $1 billion business, at least Intel doesn't care. One of the tools we have in the software is very simple, kind of back of the envelope P&L tool that basically helps you quickly within an hour kind of do a basic set of assumptions to say, is there a there, right? Is it big enough to be interesting? And if it's not, all the rest of the stuff isn't worth spending your time on. So those are the kind of things where you want to understand, where are those risks? Where are those uncertainties? And like Stephen said, which one is the most important to your success, right? And focus your energy on that one first.
I think when we were meeting together and you talked about this subject about these thresholds, right, that matter for different companies. And it's a real challenge in strategy of like, what number does it make sense for us to put the investment in to get a return on it? What risk are we going through that process? And for, like you said, something like Intel, if it's not $1 billion, it's not worth it. But that idea could be excellent for somebody further down the food chain, so to speak, right? A smaller company, a smaller opportunity where, wow, hey, somebody else would be more than happy to have a $100 million company, right? Then you get the next level down. Somebody might be happy to have a $10 million company. And so I find it really fascinating in that product development phases where there are great ideas that never come to formation because of basically the innovator's dilemma, right? Which is ultimately what Clayton Christensen talked about, which is it's just if it's not meaningful enough, we're not going to spend our time and energy around it, but it doesn't mean it's a great idea for the right person. I think one of the great opportunities is how do you take like when somebody like an Intel or a Google or like these really amazing innovation centers, they're coming up with these great ideas. How do they cascade those great ideas out into the market, right, to pass them along to somebody else? I know from time to time, somebody will leave and say, can I take that idea and run it on their own? I was curious at Intel, did that ever happen much? Or did just people kind of stay within the friendly confines of Intel?
No, that happens sometimes, but there's challenges in doing that, right? Because there's several things that Intel spun out or sold off to other partners, right? That, weren't good fits for Intel, but were good opportunities. And the challenge in doing that within a large corporation, right, is that at some point in the development of that new product or business, you start to have to optimize for processes and priorities that really matter to that business, right? And you're either going to leverage synergies with your core business, or you're going to create new capabilities or competencies that are different from your core business, right? If you're trying to leverage those synergies early on, those become dependencies that make it difficult to spin out, right? If you're trying to create something that has different competencies, right, where you're trying to develop those may be really valuable and help the business succeed, but they may be harder to then reintegrate back into the business as you're trying to scale, right? And that may create friction that actually ultimately kills the business as it grows inside as you try to grow it inside the corporation. So you kind of get into this little kind of dilemma, right, as you try to grow a business in an incubation-like approach. And so one of the things is trying to understand where that company fit really is early on so that you can make those choices consciously. When is the right time to try to capitalize on synergies versus when is the right time to maximize my understanding of the unit economics and just market fit for the product, right?
Well, I was going to say, Jim, we were an example of actually a business that was spun out of Intel, or we attempted to spin out of Intel. It was a business around Internet of Things and setting up a data marketplace for it. And we found that when we left, it took a while to get out of Intel. And so there was a lot of red tape associated with that. Got out into the market and really tried to advance that forward. It turned out, that was too early, wasn't the right business for us. And, we ended up pivoting into BRI as we did more and more consulting there. But yeah, there were several examples of successful spin-outs from NBI into the market.
Yeah, it is so fascinating, Jim, when you were mentioning that friction. I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood by top level management.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's the middle. You mean, I think, at least my experience has been when I've seen this firsthand, has been there's an idea and it might even be an adjacent pond, so to speak, from a market perspective to what you're selling, but you're selling to a new market now. And so you might rebrand your product name and you might relabel a little bit and you might doing some different product iterations to help make sure it fits that market a little bit better. And then you try to start like invoicing and shipping the product through. And all of a sudden you get friction. People are like, I don't want to do this. And often it's because it's like, I'm not making any money off of this. This seems like a waste of my time.
Too small relative to its
too
versus the business.
Right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how that middle management and sometimes even the worker level, right now down to the floor level, they're like, this is a waste of my time. And they will really hurt, right? A really good idea, a really good product, because they just don't want to approve a brand logo. Or that you even mentioned it took a while to pull out of Intel, just the bureaucracy, right? Of getting free can sometimes be a 1-2 year process of just getting the IP out.
Yeah. What you're talking about is, everybody knows about market fit, but what you're talking about is what we call company fit, right? Does this fit with the priorities, the resources, and the procedures that are set up within the company? And quite frankly, baked into the culture. And those are very hard things to change, right? They're there for a good reason. They're what makes the company successful. But when you try to do something different, you get a death by 1,000 cuts. You either have to change your idea so much that it's not a good product market fit anymore, or it's delayed so much that you're too late to get to the market.
Or you're not.
And the really tricky thing is that senior leaders don't see it. Anybody that's in positional authority can pick up the phone, they can call legal or call the branding team and say, go do this. But as an entrepreneur or somebody who's trying to get something new accomplished, you can't keep going back to your senior manager and ask for help. That just sounds like whining.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we put in place was this language of what we call RPPs, or company fit, such that when we have discussions with senior managers, you're talking about something that's very real. They already understand that this may be a small thing, but it's one of 10 small things that's delaying you. And that really helps.
Yeah. And this is actually the area that's the biggest killer of disruptive and transformative innovation in large companies. It absolutely is. We've seen it over and over. And there's billions and billions of dollars of opportunity at Intel that suffered this fate. Right. And so it's one of the most important things if you're trying to do, transformative or diversified growth and innovation within an established company, is that you will run into these problems. And so the challenge is, how do you recognize what those problems are early? And how do you then create mitigations for those? And they're hard to do, but you can do it. Right. And one of the interesting things is that the incremental opportunity available to you, right, scales with the distance from the core business, right? The further away from you get from the core business as an area to consider, the bigger the opportunity growth is, right? So if you have a lot of growth in your core business, our advice is always focus on that first, because that's going to have the least amount of resistance, right, and the most opportunity for success. But if your core business isn't growing at the level that you want or need it to, and you have to start looking for diversification to expand, right, then you have to recognize how to find where these points of conflict and friction are, and how to go about creating the mitigations to help improve your odds of success.
In fact, this was one of the first tools that we put into the Growth Forge tool suite. It's a questionnaire that goes through and looks at the norms of what you're currently trying to build in your business and what it needs versus what is your company norms. And it highlights those places where you're going to see friction and classifies it. Hey, this is something that needs full governance. This is something that needs to be done in the core business because it's very, very close adjacency. Or as we call it, this is the shiny object quadrant where, hey, it looks great to the powers that be at the time, and everybody piles in because, the CEO likes it. And those things generally don't tend to last very long, right? If there isn't a good company fit. And there's plenty of examples that both Intel and other companies have done along those lines.
Yeah.
Yep. Very interesting. Okay, so curious from your perspective now, as you're looking from your well, here let me drop back for a minute of my own curiosity. You did something that sometimes is forced, sometimes it's not, right? But it's a scary thing. You left the big company, the comfy confines of the big company. Now, granted, you took because of the avenue you were in, and so a bit of an entrepreneurial incubation, you're a little bit separate, so to speak, from like the core, right? But it clearly was something you were doing. But you ultimately took that leap, right, to leave Intel, right, and try something on your own. Let's talk about that for a minute, because that is something that's a big struggle. And though, once again, those who are familiar with Intel, there's been a lot of volatility, as they call it in the stock market, right? Where there's been a lot of challenges there recently. And so there are some brilliant people that are now finding themselves either with the decision to consider leaving, or they're being forced to leave. They don't have a choice in that process. Tell us about some of the real truth, right, of what was it like to really leave it, like the pieces, and how was that on day, D-Day +1, so to speak, when you were, you had left and you're like, where now, right? So give me some insights and get to our audience about that.
Well, so we were working inside the new business initiatives. Intel was contracting back towards the core at the time, and they decided to shut down NBI. And so we all had to go scramble, find another job. And I'll never forget the day that my boss pulled me in his office, and I was supposed to leave on a sabbatical that weekend, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we're shutting it down." So yeah, that was a rough start. We managed to land anybody that wanted to land back into Intel. And Intel was very good to me over my career. I had lots of different great experiences, worked with a lot of great people. But I'd gone through this cycle enough of, things expand, we look at new interesting things, we contract, we expand, we contract. And I remember driving into Intel down 26. I can tell you the exact spot that I had this feeling of, I just can't go through this again. I need to go, leave that comfort. It was scary. It made me feel a little nauseous of, I have another job inside of Intel. It was with ICAP if I really wanted to go that direction, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I said, I don't know if Jim and I can even get this IP out at the time, but, we're going to go try something different. It's just time. And we did. And it was scary.
Jim, from your perspective, I'm kind of curious, because it's different for everybody, right? As you go through something like this, what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was really tough for me because I basically spent my whole life at Intel, right? I'm a second generation Intel employee. I started as an intern in high school and worked there for over 30 years, right? So I didn't know anything else. But I spent most of my time at Intel doing non-core business innovation. And so, that was always where my heart was doing new products and new innovation. And so I knew the opportunities to do that within Intel were limited, right? I'd been trying it for many years, right? And while there were some successes, right, there was lots of opportunity that, never got fulfilled. And so it was a big step for me. But at the time, like Stephen said, right, in some ways, it was almost a blessing that we were trying to do the spin out, right? Because it created an immediate focus, right? Of, these are all the things we got to get done. This is the success criteria, right? Here's, we got to go move, got to set all this stuff up. And so I didn't really have time to stop and think a whole lot about sort of the macro impact this would have on my life, right? Because I was focused on execution because he had to, right? After it kind of came a little bit later, right? After we had kind of spun out. And I think at the time we were starting to realize that, that business wasn't going to get the traction that we thought it could. It was something that probably had good legs to have support within Intel, right? But as a startup, the timing was not right. And it was not a good fit. So when we started to make the pivot towards BRI and doing the consulting business and building the software, that's more when I had sort of the realization of this is the big change I'm making. Right? And then it was scary, but by that time, we were already engaged. We had partners and potential customers. And so the excitement around, the opportunity for that growth was what was kind of driving me, right?
Yeah. We got an inkling we could do this. We could actually do this.
Yeah. And so, I don't have any regrets at all. I mean, sometimes I do miss the security that, that we had with Intel, but I wouldn't trade what we're doing now to go back.
But as kind of noted, it's kind of a perceived security, right?
It is.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
there's the perception of that I'm going to be safe at Big Co for the rest of my days. And the next thing, as Steven said, somebody pulls me aside and said, your project's done. Now, in your case, it didn't mean you were out of the company, but what you were working on is no longer happening, right?
Well, yeah, it was very much, either find something new or you are out of the company. So, yeah.
And yeah, I forget, you don't have to go into any details, but did you have capital going in, or was it just your savings that you're going into this? I mean, how was that like initial start? Because that's a scary thing of when you have to get to the point where you're actually going to get a customer to start paying you, or do you get a loan to get to the damage? You just pull out of your savings. I'm just kind of curious from an insight perspective, because that's one of the biggest challenges when people leave a big company is like, oh gosh, where's cash coming from?
Right.
So kind of explain that from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Well, one of the great things about Intel, right, is that Intel does do a good job of taking care of its people when it separates, right? So there was a good separation package, right? And that gave a little runway for us. We did go try to get capital, right, investment for the business. And that was tricky because of sort of the circumstances of where we were and because it took so long to get the IP and no one's going to invest, in your company that's based on this IP that you don't have access to yet, right? So that was tricky, but part of the decision to switch and pivot to BRI was because we were doing some of the consulting work to help pay the bills while we were trying to get the other business funded, right? And we kept seeing demand for the consulting and generating business for that while we were struggling to get traction with this data business. And so it became pretty clear to us that, okay, there's revenue opportunity here. Let's go focus where the demand is and where the revenue is. And, we can't ride two horses. We're going to pick one and we're going to go. So that was
we tried for a little bit. We had a business card with two sides on it for just a little bit of time. Not good.
Yeah. And so once we made the decision, right, then we had to kind of re-step back and say, okay, what do we want this business to be, right? And we knew that we really weren't well suited and didn't really want to grow purely a professional services organization, right? We were product people. We want to build products. So we were doing the consulting and we saw a lot of value in the consulting and we were learning a lot from the clients we were engaging with. And so it was really, how do we take this consulting practice and make it much more efficient and scalable? And so one of the things that we tried to do that's unique, I think, somewhat different about other consultants, is that when we engage with a client, we try to design ourselves out of the consulting practice, right? By getting them situated where they can then use the GrowthForge software to drive the innovation on their own on an ongoing basis, right? So the focus of our consulting activity is really to help either set up those kind of innovation best practices and kind of in training and get them started, but then letting them use GrowthForge, which is a lot more cost-effective and scalable way for them to then drive that on an ongoing basis, right? Or we can come in and help on specific projects, or if they run into a particularly hard challenge of doing a transition of a business back into the core, those are things we can help with on a consulting basis. But it's really about sort of trying to make that more scalable.
It really just raised our level of consulting too, right? We weren't down on the spreadsheet level. We could interact with our clients through GrowthForge, and when they had a really serious strategy question, they could pull us in. We could all see the information together, and it allowed us to spin up very quickly on new projects.
So it sounds like, if we're hearing through this, is that first of all, I love the beginning of how you were like, well, we're working on beforehand isn't really working. And so you let the market tell you that consulting was going to create more. But interestingly enough, you ended up creating another product, which is a tool to help make your consulting more effective. And now you can train the people you're working with to now use that tool. And then you also have a recurring revenue stream that doesn't necessarily direct your regular time on it. You might have to do support, of course, right? From that perspective. So because that's one of the biggest challenges in consulting firms is you're limited by your human capital, right?
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
And now you created a tool that you can now take it to the next level, because it's not like you're working with very intelligent people, but at the same time, there is a need in the consulting to get them to learn the new habits, right, of how they need to make sure that things are working through effectively. It's hard when we're at the inside, right? It's nice to get some outside counsel to kind of guide us through a process, as we know when we go through strategy or any other significant change. So we're getting close to the end of I like to ask some additional questions if it's okay. Just now from your business today, how are you measuring success in your business?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two dimensions of that, right? One is, our pipeline of clients, right? We're trying to grow that pipeline. The other one is really sort of the competitiveness of the product, right? GrowthForge as a product. And so, there's lots of metrics around that in terms of, revenue, but it's one of the things that we're seeing right now, right, is that on both the consulting side and the software side, IA is driving a significant amount of disruption. And so, like, one of the big factors for us is, are we engaging and leveraging that emerging technology aggressively enough? And so there's a lot that we're doing both in terms of how we use AI in the consulting practice, but more importantly, how we're integrating AI capabilities into the software itself. And we're actually quite excited about the opportunities that we have under development there that will be coming very soon, because it makes the software even that much more compelling to use and much faster. So the pace of which you can do some of this stuff is just accelerating so fast.
Yeah, there is certainly powerful things of just like, what is my market position? And you could pull that right from an engine, right? That has that data so much quicker, and you can just do small edits on it, right? Versus crafting it to begin with, right? That has historically in strategy has been one of the most difficult things, is that, pencil and retina time to write something out. And now you can get a lot of it created with some initial input, right? And then you could edit from that process to help make it better. And I think that combination is to me what I see in our two businesses is that exact process is like, hey, yeah, we that like creating a vision statement as just a small little example, right? How much time, once again, for me, pencil and retina of, is it the or the, kind of joking, half joking on this, right? And it's like, killing me. It's like, now for others, it's really important. For me, it's not, but getting to there faster, right? Getting to that point where you can make a decision and using tools to help give me 7 different options on how to say as an example,
It's that
is
blank piece of
really
paper,
powerful.
right? It's that blank piece of paper problem where, okay, I'm starting, where do I start? There's a lot of aspects to strategies and running businesses, and boy, does it accelerate that first initial population throughout the tool and really help you start to think about it holistically. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, the other area I think that's really compelling, right, is that a lot of the value you get in strategy is in the research that you do, right? Learning about the environment, the competitors, customers' needs. And one of the benefits I think that AI can bring is that in order to get really broad understanding, historically, you have to invest aggressively in doing lots and lots of research, right? And that takes a lot of time and money. And AI can help accelerate the diversity of input you get much, much faster. You have to be careful about how you're making decisions based on that data, right? But it can expose insights in areas that you may have been blind to much, much faster and much more quickly. So you can get a better and broader perspective quickly that can then allow you, again, to optimize how you're spending your time when you are doing that focused research, right? In the areas that are new and unique, right, to you.
Yeah, it's so fascinating of things like how areas of consulting or expertise where it can be done so much faster, but probably there's a fear, right? People are just, I'm going to lose my job as a result of it. And it's sometimes true, right? Because if you aren't adding insight, right, not just faster, faster information. Yeah, that to me is the real values, right? Is the insights and helping people to make the decision. Just because you scramble it on ChatGPT doesn't mean you make a decision any faster.
Right.
And so that's still the challenge is we still need humans to make a decision to buy something, right? At the end of the day, right? You have to move forward with something. And at the moment, well, I think it is some, but it's not making those automatic decisions for us in all things. Okay. Now let me hop to the personal side, if you don't mind. So I'm curious for each of you, and I'm asking a different question than I typically do because we have the both of you here. You've done something which isn't easy. You've survived as a partnership, right, through this process. That's not as easy as you think. You've made it through 12 years, I think you said, right? How long have you guys been together again from working together?
Well, working together at Intel, we worked together for probably 10, 12 years.
20 years
total.
Maybe
more than that, yeah.
Yeah, between the two things. But yeah, 7 years as a partnership outside of Intel.
Okay, so that's no small thing. I'm curious, maybe each can individually answer that. And I know it's never perfect, so I don't make it like, it's sort of like a marriage, right? Marriage isn't perfect if somebody's honest, with the discussions. What have you done to help make sure you've had the most amount of success in having a successful partnership in your business?
I'm going to say we recognize each other's strengths and weaknesses, and that sounds very generic. But Jim's a divergent thinker, right? He'll come in and he'll come up with a million ideas of directions you could go. I'm a convergent thinker, right? I look at all those ideas and I go, okay, let's narrow it down to the direction we should go and drive forward. And that combination works really well. That also can cause a lot of friction if you're not aware of what time in the project should you be converging and what time should you be diverging, right? So if you leave it to Jim in that divergent thinking, you might not ever get anything done, but you have 1,000 great ideas. And if you leave it to me in that convergent thinking, you might just jump on the first thing that isn't very valuable. But that combination and that tug of war that's there, as long as you're recognizing it, is actually really, really powerful.
Yeah, you got to recognize and appreciate the value of it, right? When Nate and I started working together, internally, it took us a little while before we recognized those complementary skills, right? But once we really recognized that, right, we became quite an effective and powerful team. And we kind of diverged and paired up again, several times over our career within Intel. But every time we kind of worked together, it ended up being great because we recognized those strengths in each other. I think the other part of it is really being aligned on sort of the vision and the mission, right? So, and where those values and priorities are, right? So, those are foundational things for any team, even a team of two, right? To kind of be aligned on those things, right? It's a little bit less formal and we do it at a little bit more ad hoc than I would do it within a formal team at Intel, right? But having a clear vision and definition of what our success goals are, right, is something that's been sort of, a foundation for every team I've ever led. And, we do that within BRI. We do it a little bit more informally, but we also may do it a little bit more frequently in terms of how often we revisit, right, and check in on where we're at.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell when we aren't aligned, right? We start getting cranky with each other and we realize, wait a second, this isn't what we're normally like. What's going on here? And it takes us a little scratching to figure out, oh, okay, you were thinking this direction, I was thinking that direction, and of course they're going to friction. So like you said, any marriage or partnership, there's friction, but yeah, it's how you work through it.
For you, that's good for you. I always like to see when it's done well and you've identified that. Yeah, we're different type of people, different type of thinkers, but it sounds like you've found ways, right, to intersect them appropriately, right, to keep on moving forward. And I think the ultimate reason why things work is because you actually are creating value for your clients, right? If you weren't able to continue to grow and sell, I mean, the biggest pressure on clients is where you're not able to generate cash flow, right? And since you've been able to have that success and create a software through that process and help it expand towards that, and you have plans to continue to grow that, I think that's what's very exciting for the both of you. So Jim and Stephen, how can people connect and learn more about your company and the two of you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is probably just to go to our website, which is www.bri-associates.com. And there's information and forms there to contact us. Email is there. So we're happy to respond to people directly. We're a small boutique firm, so you don't go through a sales filter to get to us. You get right directly to us, and we're very happy to engage. That's one of actually the things of kind of leaving Intel was the importance and value of networking. Intel, you can just be consumed with all the people inside the organization that you have to interface with daily, right? But as a small company, our interfacing with other people and networking is what gives a lot of energy to us, right?
Well, Jim and Stephen, thank you so much for being a part of the Measure Success podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great.
And to our listeners listening, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I've been excited to, it's fun because they're actually located right next to me. And so we have an opportunity to actually meet in person. We get the opportunity, but it's exciting, also exciting to see people coming out of Intel having success in the entrepreneurial side, which I think this message might be really helpful for those who are listening locally and other companies that are having. Intel is not the only company that are making these changes. And so anytime you can hear from people, and are you okay with people reaching out to you about asking about that entrepreneurial journey?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. We've actually been doing quite a bit of that lately.
Yeah. No, we're here to help anybody who's going through that transition and just wants to chat.
Perfect. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much. And as we always like to say, once again, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.